Hey everyone, so today we're reviewing for the AP macro exam with the FRQ that has to deal with Unit 4, the financial sector. It's quite interesting, so let's get right into it. So it says, assume that economy is in long-run equilibrium. Assume that consumers wish to hold on to less money because they can use credit cards more frequently to purchase goods and services compared to cash. So consumers don't want to hold on to cash. Got it. So part A wants us to draw a correctly labeled graph of the money market and show the effect of the reduced holdings of money on the equilibrium nominal interest rate in the short run. So A wants us to draw a money market graph, and so that's what we're going to do. We're going to have our axes. We're going to call this money market MM, and then on our y-axis we're going to have the nominal interest rate. So we're going to write NIR, and then on our x-axis we're just going to have the quantity of money. Okay, so the quantity of money is basically a measure of how much money people save or hold on to and store. And so the first thing we're going to draw on this is the demand curve. And that is going to be just downward sloping like normal. And so this is going to be the money demanded. Okay, so this is the pretty much the amount of money that people hold on to. The next thing we're going to draw is the money supplied. And the money supplied is by the government. All right, it's by the Fed. And so the money supplied is going to be a straight vertical downward sloping curve, and we're going to call that money supplied. And the reason for that is because the nominal interest rate has no effect on the money supplied, right? Even if the nominal interest rate is super high or super low, the money supply can only be affected by a couple things. If we're talking about limited reserves, talk about things like open market operations or the discount rate or any of that stuff. The government can tweak those levers in order to change the money supply to their liking, to increase or decrease the nominal interest rate, but the nominal interest rate itself is not going to change the money supply there. So we want to find the effect of reduced holdings of money on the equilibrium nominal interest rate. So when we're talking about the holding of money, that deals directly with demand, right? And so what we're going to see is actually a huge shift in the demand for money curve. So it's going to be a shift of the entire curve. So because people want to hold on to less money, that means we're going to see a decrease in this curve, which is a shift to the left. So I'm going to draw this new curve in red. That's not a straight line at all. Let's try again. Boom, that looks pretty good. And so now we just need to find the intersection. So this is the original intersection here, and this determines our nominal interest rate. And now we have our new intersection down here, and that is our new interest rate. And so the question is asking, show the effect on the equilibrium nominal interest rate. Well, this was the original interest rate, right? And then our new interest rate is down here. So clearly we can see the effect is that the nominal interest rate decreased. Cool. Let's move on to part B. So B says, based on the change in the interest rate in part A, what will happen to each of the following in the short run? First, what will happen to the price of previously issued bonds? Okay, so this is an interesting one. Basically, what's going to happen is people before bought bonds, right, at a certain interest rate. I'm going to assume that it's going to be at this equilibrium interest rate, right? So you get a set percentage return on those bonds, right? But now that the interest rate has fallen, now that people who want to go to buy bonds, they can only get those bonds at this interest rate, right? And for bonds, you want a higher return, and so you want higher interest rates. And so now that you can only get bonds for a lower interest rate, that means those bonds that were sold before at a higher interest rate, well, those are going to be at a higher demand. If it's higher demand, that means the price of those bonds will increase. And so here we can just say that this will increase. Now, number 2 says, what will happen to the price level in income? So this one, you need to actually explain it. What I would do here is draw out the aggregate demand and supply curve. So here we're just going to have price. This really should be price level. And then down here, we're going to have GDP, production. And so we're going to have our downward sloping aggregate demand, upward sloping aggregate supply. And to be honest, you probably don't have to do this. like draw out the entire graph, but this is just really easy to visualize. So there's a cause and effect, and this is really common with macro. Sorry, with macro is you need to know like the boom bop effects. Okay, so we know here that the interest rate decreased. The interest rate decreasing means that investment. I'm not going to write out the whole thing. I'll just write investments. So now people can invest. They can get loans at lower interest rates, right? That's good for people who are trying to invest in, build businesses or whatever. That is going to cause investment to increase, but it is also more importantly going to cause consumer spending, I'm going to call that CS, to increase as well. Because consumers, they can also take out loans at a lower interest rate, and therefore they can spend more, and that is going to encourage them to spend more as well. So if consumer spending increases, then that means there's going to be an increase in the aggregate demand curve. Okay, so on our graph here, there's an increase in aggregate demand. That means our entire aggregate demand curve will shift to the right. Boom, and now we have a new equilibrium point with the aggregate supply and aggregate demand. And we can see that our price level increased, right? So this is our original. I'm going to label this our original point, and we can very clearly see the price level increased. And so we can see here our price level. We're going to say that increased. So we say increased here. That's kind of confusing. So price level increased, and we're going to say the real income is very closely correlated with GDP, right? Just all the output, the value of all the goods and services produced in your country. If that goes up, then it's very likely that your economic output is increasing, your economy is booming, right? Your wages, now that the economy is doing well, wages are likely to go up as well. And so your real income is also very likely to go up. So if you were explaining this in words, that's definitely something I would touch upon. Let's move on to the next part. C says, with a constant money supply, based on your answer in part B2, will the velocity of money increase, decrease, or remain the same, or is the change indeterminate? So we're going to see here. So for this answer, if I can type, we have to kind of think about it. So if you increase your GDP, right, our GDP is increasing, that means the productivity and production capability of our economy also increased, right? Now, we have to understand what is currently happening with our money supply. Our money supply stayed the same. And so if the value of all the goods and transactions in our economy increased, but we have the same amount of money, that means the same amount of money, that amount of money must have gone through more transactions, right? If the same amount of money goes through more transactions, that is correlated with the velocity, right? The number of times that the money gets spent, the number of transactions it goes through. And therefore, we can determine that the velocity of the money must increase. Boom. Move on to the last part of this FRQ. D says, if the central bank wishes to reverse the change in the interest rate identified in A, what open market operation would it use? Pretty simple here if you know your stuff. So we want to reverse a change which originally was a decrease in the interest rate. So we want to increase interest rates, right? How do we increase interest rates? So that's right. How do we increase interest rates? Question mark. Well, we increase interest rates by decreasing the money supply. Okay. How do we decrease the money supply? We decrease the money supply with government actions such as open market operations, which is just the buying and selling of bonds by the government with the banks. And so it wants a specific open market operation. In this case, that would be the selling of bonds by the government to the banks, right? So if the government has a bunch of bonds or assets, they would sell it to the bank. The bank has to obviously pay money for it, right? And that money is now no longer with the bank. And the bank doesn't have that money to loan out to other people and do the multiplier effect and, basically have money in circulation to increase the money supply. So in that case, money supply would decrease, which we know would increase interest rates. And you can also draw this on the graph, right? So we have our graph right here. Let's just say money supply decreased. So now it's over here. Boom. Call that money supply 1. And now we have a new intersection point. right here. And we can see right here, interest rates increase. Maybe not to the magnitude, and we would probably have to shift it a lot more, like maybe like out here or something that's saying like that. But the point is, interest rates are going to increase. And that does it for the entire FRQ. If you guys have any questions, drop it down in the comments and subscribe for more review videos.